Okay, great. As I mentioned, I'm Pam Kalfa from the Plum Library, and we're going to take a look at Ancestry.com. One thing that I don't know a lot about is the DNA options that Ancestry goes over the DNA test kit where you can spit in a tube and have your DNA results sent to you. But we're going to talk about trying to discover your family history a little bit online as well. Oops. So Ancestry.com is the world's largest genealogical database. It's the largest collection of family history anywhere online. It is a paid service, however, you can access it with your library card through the library, and we'll take a look at that site, how to get to it. Right now, a lot of libraries have time limits on how long you can be in the building. But Ancestry for the next few weeks is available at home, even with your library card. During the pandemic, the company that runs Ancestry extended the in-library service to home service. So hopefully they'll keep extending it. But we'll talk about some options if you want to prefer to use Ancestry at home, what your options are if you're not able to make it into the library. Like I said, it's free with your library card. If you access it through the library's website. And we'll take a look how to do that at the end here. One thing is you can, and it's full access free with your library card. The one thing you can't do is edit family trees. So if you're really into looking at family trees and editing them, you aren't able to do that with Ancestry through the library, but you can still look at the family trees. You just can't add your information, but everything else is free with the library version. So one thing I recommend is starting your genealogical search at home. And what this means is kind of seeing what kind of stuff you have at your home, whether that be birth certificates, journals, diaries, photos, and also, if possible, interview any people in the family. A lot of times with genealogical research, we can get caught up with names and places and dates, but it is helpful if we can get more comprehensive story. It gives us a bigger picture of our family history. But the one thing, if you have any kind of birth certificates or marriage license, it's good to have because you can get those exact spellings or exact names to narrow down your search. And that's really important as we get deeper and deeper. And if you're getting stuck or if you're getting a lot of results, any type of specific information to type in on Ancestry is something great to have. Now, if any of you have started genealogical research, you know it can be very overwhelming. It's helpful to keep a chart or log what you've searched and where you've searched, in addition to write down which spellings you've used. And we'll take a look here in a second about different examples of why spelling and why doing alternate spellings may be really important. And record what has been successful. It's also important to write down places you've called to get information and keep track of the resources you've tried. And working with people with Ancestry.com and other genealogical research, I find people may do it for a few months and then life happens and you put it aside and then you come back to it. So to have a chart and write down what you've searched, it'll make your future searches more successful. And not all family history is online. And so if you've called different places, keeping track of that information is really great. So let's talk about why searching on Ancestry or just genealogical research can be so difficult. Genealogical records weren't created in a super logical way. And here's a fantastic example I always like to use when talking about this is different spellings or versions of names. So this woman's name is Anne Jenkins. But records could have it as Mrs. John Jenkins, Mrs. J.R. Jenkins, Anne Presley Jenkins by her middle name. And those are just a few variations of one person's name. If you're not sure about the spelling, it could be an Anne with an E, Anne without an E. So that's why it's helpful to search all variations of someone's name, even if you have the exact spelling. The best thing for women is maiden name. That's a great way to help narrow down some searches as well, because then you have multiple points to try and search for. And then changing boundaries. So state borders and even country borders change so often, especially back when some of our ancestors were coming about. So while we think maybe our ancestors are from Poland, maybe they were actually from Lithuania or, neighboring countries. So to search multiple country records too, because over time those boundaries changed as well. So a lot to really kind of impede our searching, but we'll go through some tips to help us here. Anytime, I like to say start specific and then broaden out. If you know exact names, life events, location, and when I pull up the example here, we'll take a look at all that and how we can add that in. Because if you search broad, it's going to be too overwhelming. The more specific information you can type in, the better. And then you can broaden it out over time. And wildcards is a way if you're unsure of a letter or number in a search. And we'll show that when I pull up the example here. And we can search by someone's birth date, marriage date, all types of things. The most information we have, the better. And to use different categories, whether we know someone's sibling, we know their occupation, all those things may help us if we continue to get stuck. The advanced search features are great if we have more information, which I know always we do not have at times. Why searches fail? Sometimes the record isn't online, as we talked about. Sometimes someone wrote the name down wrong, transcribed the name down wrong. The record may just simply not exist, or it may not have been saved. And in my experience working with archives, I can tell you all things are not online. As much as more is becoming online, a lot is not. So reaching out to local historical societies, cemeteries are a great place as well to look for names, because then you get some maybe dated death information as well. So there's a lot of reasons why searches fail, and this work can be very overwhelming and very frustrating, but it's very rewarding when we get there. And that's why looking at home to see if you have any information or in family member's house can be very helpful. So searching names, if you have someone in your family who may have the last name of Smith, that's a very common surname and you're going to get a lot of results. So we're going to find as much information out about their lives as possible and search from there. If they married someone with an uncommon name, that's a way that you might be able to get better results for them. Those common surnames, common last names are really tough to try and get a lot of information from. And then we can also do what genealogists and researchers call follow the census trail. And we'll pull an example of the census up here. And the census is a great, valuable information. And we can say if they were in the 1910 census and we get some information about them there, then maybe we can look in the 1920 census, kind of trace them through that. As I said, maiden names are very helpful and they can be found on marriage records, military pensions, headstones, and church records are a fantastic research. So reaching out to local churches, some big churches on the national level keep amazing records. So trying with some church membership, if you knew someone in your family was a member of the church, that's a great way to start as well. So just to go through quickly here, some different records is, as I mentioned, the census. And I don't know, I find the census absolutely fascinating. To me, there's a lot more than names and ages on there. There's countries of origin. The Ancestry has the UK census. The occupation on there I find fascinating, what different occupations used to be called, or learning that different ancestors have different occupations. That's all. Census is a great place to start. Vital records are at the city, county, or state level. Sometimes these are through Ancestry. Here in Pittsburgh, there's a vital records office downtown that can assist you as well. It's marriage license, birth and death certificates, divorce. And sometimes there's more information on there than just name and date. So these are your pretty standard government records, I guess you could say. Military records, I've had a lot of success in working with people looking at military records, and I just find, once again, them fascinating. I think because sometimes they give characteristics, color of hair, that maybe they didn't have hair, color of eyes. The military records can contain a lot of great information, and draft registrations as well. Immigration records I find are very hit or miss, but it's definitely worth a shot, especially if you know the approximate date or port of entry into the country. Sometimes you can find the immigration record on the federal census, and sometimes there's passenger lists, crew lists, and citizenship records contained in these immigration records. These are tricky because, as you can imagine, immigration records weren't, sometimes not always kept properly, transcribed right. So they're there, but the record keeping might not be the best. And then directories, the city and area directories are really great, especially if someone in your family may have owned a business. When I worked at the Atlantic City Library, as you can imagine, in the Atlantic City archives, we would get a fair number of calls of people asking about, oh, my grandparents used to have a business on this street. Can you look it up? It was called this, or it was called this. Can you tell me the address? So we'd go through old city directories, and they were really, really useful information. City directories are kind of like the white pages phone book, but they had a little bit more information. And then there's a few directories on Ancestry that are professional and organizational, just some random company records as well. And here's a list of just a few other records that we might find interesting. Church histories, as I mentioned. I found some of my ancestors' yearbook photos on Ancestry.com one day, which was great. It was great to just see them. I'm sure in a box in some of my relatives' house, those yearbooks exist, but now I was able to save a digital copy of it. So if something happens, we're able to still have that photo. And wills are great if there's anything. Court records and tax lists. Those are a few other resources that are available on Ancestry. So I am going to pull up the resource and show you a quick look before we get further along here. And as I mentioned, Ancestry is currently available for free. Oops. Let's see. Bring your shared screen to the front. Okay, let me pull it up here. Start share screen. Okay. So if I I'm going to go to Plum Library. If you go down to find ebooks and more, it's going to link to the countywide website. And this website has all of our databases, information about ebooks. It's a fantastic website. You can see a list of everything. So we have databases for school. We have tutor.com if kids need help tutoring. There's a lot on this site. But if I go to reference and research or biography and genealogy, I can also find it on a list as well. If I click go, it's going to take me to this website. And just like print books, we all share ebooks here in the county. or an e-resources. So I am now logged in on Ancestry. So this is what Ancestry looks like. You can look at message boards. I'm going to show you before we dive into some examples. This charts and forms section is really helpful. It has an example family tree if you want it, but it has the research calendar. So if you wanted a guideline on how to keep track of what you looked for, oops, that's a great way to do so. Oops. And correspondence records. So you don't have to use these per se, but it's a good way to get you looking at keeping track of what you've searched for. So on the home page, if I go to begin searching, so this is what's going to come up. And the initial page is just first name, last name, and place and birth year. If I go to show more options, it's going to allow me to add different events. And we'll take a look at that here in a second. But in the presentation, I talked about wildcards. So you want to use a wildcard if you're not sure how someone's name is spelled. So I'm going to use our example of Ann Jenkins. So if I was unsure if her name had an E at the end, you can add what a wildcard is. And that's a symbol. It's either an asterisk or a question mark. And what that does is it clues the database into searching for things, Ann without an E or Ann an E. So I'm just going to search for her. It's going to pull up all sorts of stuff. So over here, you can look for broad and exact. I need to add a birth name or a birth location because it was too broad. It even told me that. So also under birth year, this calculator allows you to estimate if you don't know, but I can also use a wildcard if I don't know someone's birth year as well. Oops. If I press exact, it's going to search exactly for 1902, but I can do plus or minus 10 years and it broadens the search. So if I press search, oh, 0 good matches. Let me get rid of the birth year. Okay, I apologize. Oh, it still says 1902. Let's do update. Let's broaden it out. And there you go. You can see that it gives me over here all different ways to search. We're going to look at a better example so we can look at someone's records a little bit better, but I just want to show you how the wildcard function works. So I'm going to show an example and then we're going to go through some questions. So I'm going to look up Mauro Tumolo. He lived in Pittsburgh, and I'm going to do search. However, if I wanted to, I could add an occupation. I could add a marriage. If we do some searching and figure out who he was married to, we can add that here. I could add a father, mother, sibling, spouse. So if you know someone's family, you can add that all here. So I'm just going to search for Mauro Tumolo in Pittsburgh, and we're going to see what comes up. This is a very uncommon name, so we're going to get some searches here. Over here is census, voter list, birth and marriage and death. On the left side, we can search by category and kind of narrow it down. And then this is our best search here. So I'm going to just click on the World War I draft registration cards, the first one that pops up. And if we look at the record, we can see the actual record. However, this one's not too bad. Some of them are a little tough to read and haven't been transcribed well. That's where, whoops, let's go back to this. This information is the transcribed record. So what you can do is you can send this document to your email or print it out. And if I click view printer friendly, it's going to give me this information, the valuable information. While looking at the record is great and you can print it from here, it might not be as helpful, especially with some of the really difficult ones. This is more helpful because it gives us the address, when he lived there, birthplace, birth date. I love this physical build, slender. I think that's so fascinating. So let's go back. Let's see what other records we have. Let's take a look at the federal census, which, as we touched upon, has a lot of information. So the federal census can get really tough to read if you want to read it like this. That makes it really tough. But if you zoom in, you can find the person you're looking for and highlight it there. However, as great as it is to look at these old records, sometimes we just need to look at the information. This is the one we pulled up. So we can see his birth year, his age. Even though this is about 1897, we had the record from the draft record. We have a map of the home. Different censuses ask different questions. So lives on a farm, if they had a radio set. The home value is phenomenal. And this is where the census becomes increasingly valuable, is down here. It has other members of the household. And so sometimes you can figure out if people live together at a certain time and when, or you can figure out their kids' names. So I would definitely, the census, I think, is some of the most helpful information to start with. As you can see, electric works, occupation, a fitter, so something in the electric field, and all that. So let's see. And then we have veterans burial cards as well. These, especially if they're newer, are typed out a little bit easier. And then this way you can find the cemetery name if you want to go see the cemetery. I know some people like to do that, especially if they're traveling abroad. But it also says their dates of service as well and their date of death. Sometimes in some of the, you can find beneficiary information as well.